Okay, so for younger viewers, for folks born, say, from about 1990 on, what I'm about to say and what I'm about to get into is going to seem probably a bit mind-boggling to you because you haven't known anything else. But once upon a time, there were no movies based on comic books. Or at the very least, those movies were few and very, very far between. And of varying quality. And then, in the magical year of 1989, something happened. Something happened that started a very long trek to kind of where we are in the comic book dominated blockbuster scene that we're in now. And of course, 1989 is when Tim Burton's Batman film opened, which, regardless of what you think of that movie, I happen to be in the camp that feel that it is a film that does not hold up. Visually, it's still amazing, but plot-wise and everything, it just doesn't hang together very well. But regardless of what you think of that movie, it cannot be argued that that was one of the most influential films of all time. The chain reaction that it set off in the blockbuster world, and especially how comics were being portrayed, can't be understated. So you suddenly got a lot of films that were trying very desperately to grab on to that sudden burst of popularity. But now here was the problem with it. While there was a great desire for those types of movies, the simple fact of the matter is that the logistics of making a superhero movie, a movie based on a comic book, in the early 90s was daunting. They just didn't have the technology that we have. To try to imagine, I mean, if you've seen like the 70s Spider-Man TV show, you know, try to imagine them doing a Spider-Man movie and trying to do the special effects that they can get away with now. Even, you know, even if you look at the early Spider-Man movies, the Sam Raimi ones, you know, think of the X-Men, you know. And so what they were trying to do there in the early 90s is they were trying to grab up superheroes that, one, were cheap, and two, didn't have a lot of superpowers to speak of. And what you got was this weird amalgam of a lot of Batman clones. There was the Shadow, there was the Phantom, and a couple others. But the year immediately following Batman's release, we got another film that I feel has really slipped through the cracks of the comic book movie genre. People don't talk about it very much. They do talk about it, but not favorably. And I find that kind of odd to me, because I think this movie, one, holds up fairly well, and two, offers some things that the Batman movie didn't quite get, but it started to bring in, again, things that we kind of take for granted in today's blockbuster, superhero-obsessed culture. And the film I'm talking about is, of course, 1990's Dick Tracy, as directed by Warren Beatty. One thing I know about this movie is, especially after rewatching it today, boy, it is Hasselhoffian levels of ego stroking from Warren Beatty. But here's the thing. You have an Oscar-winning director. Someone that was not some weird up-and-comer like Tim Burton. This was a guy with an established track record, and I believe he already had his Oscar by that point, saying, I'm going to direct a superhero movie or a comic book movie. And I think what he turned out is pretty fantastic. Now, unlike some of the other films I've already covered here, this one actually does have a little bit of a review presence online. I can think of at least 2 reviewers who have done short little reviews of this movie within the past 10 years. Todd in the Shadows did an episode on it for his Cinemadonna series, where he kind of looked at the acting career of Madonna, which, by the way, if you have not seen Todd in the Shadows Cinemadonna series, you need to go look it up. It is phenomenal. It's really great. I love it. It's really funny. But he was not kind to this movie. The Nostalgia Critic, back when I respected the Nostalgia Critic, did an episode on it, a short little review on it for his Disney-cember series, and again, was not that kind to it. I'm not going to say that the criticisms they brought up aren't valid, because they are, but to me, they don't really ruin the film for me. So let's talk about this movie for those of you who might not have seen it. So again, 1990, directed by and starring Warren Beatty. It's probably the simplest plot. I'm thinking of the last films I've done for this series, and like the long rants I had to go on just to explain the plot. Well, this one's fairly straightforward. Super detective, super cop Dick Tracy is fighting the mob led by Big Boy Caprice. That is kind of it. That's the story. Of course, there are more twists and turns and whatnot in there, but that is the basic through line of this film. One of the criticisms that I heard, and I don't necessarily disagree with, is that this film doesn't have a story, doesn't have a plot. It's just it's a bunch of events that kind of happen that are kind of strung together by a very thin connector to kind of give the illusion of a plot. And that is not untrue. But here's why this doesn't bug me. Say what you want about Warren Beatty, but watching this film, especially watching it with the information I have now as an adult, and especially given my own interests, I can tell you he put a lot of study into this film. This film really feels like a throwback to the gangster pictures of the 30s and 40s when they made the original Dick Tracy movies. And especially it has connections to the original Dick Tracy serials. The Cliffhanger movie serials, which, as I've mentioned, as I've written several plays about, and am in the process of writing a third, I love the serials, and that's exactly what they are. If you ever watch a serial all strung together, that's exactly what it is. It's just a series of kind of barely connected events that form a greater whole. And if you watch them all together, it sometimes feels like they're going off on a bunch of different directions. Well, that's because they had 15 chapters to fill. You also got to understand that this movie, unlike the comic book films we have now, and even like the Batman movies, Dick Tracy, as far as I know, and if I'm wrong about this, then pardon me, but Dick Tracy was primarily a Saturday or Sunday newspaper comic. He didn't have a comic book. They would later gather the strips together and put them in book form, kind of like they do with Garfield or The Far Side or Calvin and Hobbes. But he didn't have, a regular comic book. So therefore, didn't have the kind of the defining story arc that comic book characters kind of have now, that movies can now draw inspiration from. Like I was just watching Captain America Civil War. That's a great example of they had a comic book, a storyline, and took kind of the basic premise, one that was familiar to the audience, and they understood Captain America's role in it, and said, okay, we can adapt this. Dick Tracy didn't have that. It was a series of just kind of one-shots. They had to get as much information across in however many panels they had, and then you had to wait till tomorrow. So the reason why the kind of disjointed nature of the plot to this movie doesn't bug me is because it's very much like reading or watching a film version of a comic strip. And let me tell you, Warren Beatty took that concept and ran with it. And it is a concept. It is a strong directorial concept that he wanted to make you feel like you were actually watching a comic strip come to life. And in every shot, every angle, every character introduction, everything possible, this movie is absolutely marinated in that concept. If I believe, and I'll probably restate this at the end, if people don't watch this movie for any other reason, you need to watch it for the visuals. And I don't say that often, because it is gorgeous to look at. The sets, which are models a lot of times, and they don't try to hide the fact that they're models. Boy, the choices in color. I remember hearing making of things when this came out when I was a kid, and how fucking obsessed he was with the colors in this movie. It's beautiful. They're solid. There's not a lot of patterns. And yeah, just the colors of the costumes. Like, Dick Tracy's jacket, his yellow jacket and fedora are bright yellow. All right? The blues, the reds, the greens, the oranges, even the blacks. You know, the black clothes seem extra black just next to all the bright colors. I mean, it is such, again, kind of I hate to draw this comparison, but very much you compare the DC movies to Marvel movies. And the color palette there to the color palette in the Marvel films. Same thing here. Whereas Tim Burton went for a very striking visual metaphor with his movie. It was all very black. It was very gothic, very noir. And Dick Tracy went the complete opposite route and said, no, it's a comic. Let's make it bright, colorful. Even in the lighting, there's lighting in certain areas of this movie where the characters are bathed in green or red. You also notice that for the most part, there are exceptions to this, but the colors are very distinctive. Dick Tracy and Tess Trueheart, his girlfriend, are in a lot of blacks and reds. The bad guys are all in a lot of purples and greens and dark blues. So it's just gorgeous to look at. It's amazing, the attention to detail and just how much these costumes stand out. You know, as a guy who's done some costume designing, I find that very fascinating. The makeup, because of course one of the things Dick Tracy is known for are his unique villains, you know, with, you know, not so much just like Batman is with like the Riddler and Mr. Freeze. No, these were known for villains with weird faces, because again, comic strip, you want them to be easily identified. So, you know, prune face and flat top, little face, shoulders, and all these other guys. And the makeup they do is pretty astonishing for the time. You know? So, yeah, another thing that Warren Beatty clearly, again, studied the classic gangster films and studied, you know, the original Dick Tracy serials. A lot of things like the fight scenes, Dick Tracy's fight scenes are very, you know, old school cowboy punches, big crosses, and things like that. He speeds up the film a couple times when they're fighting. What's funny about this movie, and here's a thing that this movie did that Batman kind of did, but that this movie started to make even more acceptable. So one of the big things about Batman is, oh my God, they got Jack Nicholson to play the Joker. Getting Michael Keaton to play Batman wasn't as big a coup, but getting Jack Nicholson to play the Joker, oh wow, fucking, that's great. But Dick Tracy, it loaded its cast down with big name, respected actors. So you had Warren Beatty, who, again, despite what your opinion is, he is real well respected. Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, Paul Sorvino, Dick Van Dyke, Charles Durning. I mean, he had a really respectable cast in this. Kathy Bates is in this for like 5 seconds before she was Kathy Bates, but she's in this. I mean, so this had a big cast. And now here's the other thing, kind of what I was gonna say, and then kind of got distracted. It's funny, this movie kind of owes a lot of its things to not just the 89 Batman, but also the Adam West Batman, because this movie sold itself. I remember this very distinctly. It sold itself not so much on come see Warren Beatty play Dick Tracy. It's come see Al Pacino play Big Boy Caprice. Come see Dustin Hoffman play Mumbles. Come see all of these big name stars in this really gaudy makeup. And let's not beat around the bush here, folks. Just like Jack Nicholson steals the 89 Batman, the reason to watch this movie is Al Pacino. Watching Al Pacino as Big Boy Caprice is a fucking force of nature. He is, I once heard this saying, and I've used it, and it fits here so perfectly. The man is chewing the scenery and flossing with the props. And damn, he's good. God, it is just so good to watch an actor cut loose. And you can tell he is just having the time of his life, just cutting loose and going big. So he got an Oscar nomination for that role, if you can believe it. And kind of like watching the 60s Batman with Burgess Meredith and Cesar Romero and Frank Gorshin and all these big name character actors just having a ball cutting loose and going big. It's a thrill to kind of watch Al Pacino and some of the other ones. Dustin Hoffman as Mumbles is a lot of fun. The guy I remember really distinctly, William Forsythe as Flat Top. When I was a kid, my buddy Ryan and I, Flat Top was the fucking man to us. But really, watching it back, Flat Top is kind of the Darth Maul of this movie. He looks cool, or he's like the Boba Fett. He looks cool, but he doesn't really do much. But there's just a presence. I think it's because, and I found no evidence of this, but I really believe they did this. I think it's because they made his makeup look like James Cagney. His makeup, the flat top makeup, it really looks like someone took some silly putty, put it on a picture of James Cagney, and then stretched it out a little bit. And I think they did that on purpose. I found no evidence to support that theory, but I believe they did that on purpose. And I think it adds to the, like I say, the old school noir feel of it. Stephen Sondheim did music for it. The songs are fantastic. I think one of the songs won an Oscar as well. So yeah, there's a lot of great things going on in this movie. Another great performance in this, Charlie Crusoe, which I think I'm mispronouncing his name, as the kid, as Dick Tracy's kid sidekick. Charles Crusoe is probably best known as Robin Williams' son in Hook. And then he did this movie, and then he kind of faded out for a bit. I know he's done a couple other films. But it's weird because he was a pretty good child actor. Like, he was really good, really believable. But yeah, for whatever reason, but he's fairly good in this. So, is this movie perfect? And the answer is no, it's not. As I've said, some of the criticism heaped on this movie is not undeserved. So what's the biggest problem with this movie? I know some people want me to say it's Warren Beatty as Dick Tracy, but it's not. The problem is Madonna as Breathless Mahoney, the lounge singer. Todd in the Shadows covers this very well, so I'm trying not to beat up on somebody too much. especially when you're criticizing someone who has already kind of been raked over the coals as it relates to their acting career. So it's like there's a difference between beating a dead horse and mutilating it. But you got to be honest here, as it's been documented 1,000 times, Madonna is not an actor. She just isn't. The charisma she has on stage does not translate to the movies. It just fucking doesn't. And this was at like the height of her career, the late 80s. I mean, this was like Madonna was the rock star. And she was really trying to break into movies. And she'd had flop after flop after flop. And here it was, a big summer blockbuster. And a role seemingly written for her, the sexy ingenue and all that. I personally have never found Madonna sexy, but, other people did or do. So a role seemingly tailor-made for her, and God almighty, she is awful. And here's what makes it worse, is that Warren Beatty, in my mind, is not that good of an actor. He can be, but he's just not that strong. You compare him to other people who have played comic book characters, and he is just not that strong. So you have a not strong actor doing a lot of scenes with a not good actor. Oh, and it is painful to watch. It's Padme and Anakin version 1.0. The dialogue just seems so stilted. There's no charisma coming off either one of them. They have no chemistry together, even though they ended up dating. It's painful to watch. And the problem with that is that the scenes he has with her are the only scenes of actual character development or thrust of an emotional story that you get from Dick Tracy. Because the whole thing is he has his girl, Tess Trueheart, played wonderfully by the late Glenn Hadley. The good, perfect, wonderful, sweetest. I mean, her name is Tess Trueheart. Come on. And then you have, the bad girl, Breathless Mahoney, who you would think, given his character of a tough guy and a hard cop, she'd fit him better. And the whole thing is supposed to be the pull and push, between what his heart wants and what, his loins may want. You know what I mean? The problem is when there's no chemistry and you really don't get any of that. You get a lot of scenes with Madonna presenting like a mandrill, but no real character or no real emotion being put into it, and it makes your character, your title character, dull, and you don't care. And again, Warren Beatty is not a bad choice to play Dick Tracy, but this just zaps him. This is why when the advertising for this movie, the press around this movie, it all focused on, people were, oh Madonna. But when it came out, the studio pushed, Al Pacino as Big Boy Caprice, Dustin Hoffman as, it pushed these guys. Like I remember them pushing Paul Sorvino as Lips Manlins. He's in it for maybe 10 minutes and is then killed. But they knew that, getting you to come for the villains and the fun that you were going to have watching them was going to make up for, this major issue. This is another problem kind of with the climax of the movie, where you eventually have the whole film is Dick Tracy trying to get Big Boy Caprice. So it's got to come down to those two sooner or later. And it's like, it's a showdown in like the mechanical works for a bridge where Tess is tied to, the gears, and Dick Tracy is fighting Big Boy Caprice. Dick Tracy, who we have seen punch entire rooms of guys out with one blow, seems to have trouble taking on this short little hunchback. He has a hunch, and he's like the hunchback of Notre Dame in his movements. And you have trouble taking that guy out? Seriously? You're not building tension here. So the film has its problems. I don't disagree with the people who say that it's not a perfect movie, because it's not a perfect movie. And it's not as good as, even though I don't think Batman was that good before it, but structurally, it's not as good. But all that being said, I believe this movie belongs further up in the discussion of, the history of comic book films. It's still a ball. Whether again, the issues with the story and everything notwithstanding, again, it is a ball to watch these actors in the heavy makeup just go nuts and have a great time. It's gorgeous to look at. I am blown away every time by the pure commitment to the visual metaphor of the piece. Sondheim songs, again, I'm not a big fan of Madonna as an actor or as a singer, really. I don't think she sounds that great. But the songs are by Sondheim and are great. Sooner or Later, Back in Business. There's one thing I got to give Madonna credit for. I should mention this. And I say this for a lot of actors. Some of the best acting she has done in this movie is when she doesn't talk. Because, boy howdy, her character, Breathless Mahoney, gets beaten around by Al Pacino. She gets smacked in the face. There's this kind of funny scene where he's choreographing the dance number with her, and he's up there just hamming it up. She's singing, and she's wearing this little midriff thing, and he comes along, and she's got her arms up, and he slaps her sides, and she goes, and you can see it. You can see the pain of the character. Boy, so she really put up with it, and all the props in the world, because it looks painful, and you feel for the character when that happens. If only she didn't talk. But I'm beating a dead horse. Sorry. But the songs are really catchy and fun. And I think a lot of the side characters are a lot of fun. It's great. The makeup is interesting. I think this film deserves to be higher in the conversation when people talk about, kind of the evolution of the comic book film, or even the evolution of the blockbuster. This was a film with a very strong directorial vision, and I think it came out fairly well. I still enjoy watching it. So if you've never seen it, if you're a fan of comic book movies, and maybe you want something that feels a little different than the Marvel DC kind of back and forth, check out this one. Don't say I didn't warn you about some of the other parts, but check this out. I think you might enjoy it. So that's all for now. Of course, our wonderful state of being rolls on. I know a lot of friends who are doing various projects and streaming. Some folks are reading books on live. A couple friends of mine I saw tonight were doing a cooking and crooning show, which I thought was amazing, because the husband is a singer, and the wife is very good with cooking. Man, it was a lot of fun to watch. They were very good. I feel like this is my part. I'm doing something. Not a lot of movie reviews out there right now, so this is my part, and I hope you're enjoying it. I'm enjoying going back and looking at these films and talking about them. And yeah, more to come, so let's get through this together. So, as always, stay healthy, drive safe, and I'll see you at the movies.